Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Rich Miller, and I'm with Visible Technologies, and I'll be your moderator today for the session. We've got two people with us today. One is Kathy Buena, who's a senior business analyst with Visible. She's been with Visible for about 6 years, so very, very deep in segmentation. She works on our Insight Services team, which is really a group of people that works with you to solve very deep business questions using social media data. So she's got a ton of background on this, ton of context for methodologies for advanced segmentation around social media data. I think you'll find her presentation super interesting. Like I said, Kathy's been with us for about 6 years. Prior to that, she's held a number of different roles, analytic and account manager roles, and advertising and multi-channel marketing types of roles. Really, really relevant stuff for us, so I think a really great person to give us some information today. And then Steve Reeves is actually a solution consultant with Visible, so he's responsible for working with our clients to help configure the platform to really solve their business challenges. Steve's been working in the social listening space for 3 or 4 years now with Visible and other companies like Viral Technologies. Prior to that, he held a bunch of different positions in integrated marketing, specifically focusing on social, working with large companies like ExxonMobil. And he's also a guest contributor to Ad Age, a guest blogger for Ad Age, talking about challenges that can be solved with social media data. So great, great people to do our presentation today. Kathy, the baton is yours.
All right. Thanks very much, Rich, and hello, everybody. I have a very interesting case analysis in mind that I'm really excited to share with everyone today. But, first things first, let me quickly talk about some baseline qualities of social media data. And if you've done listening in the past, this will not be new news to you, but it will resonate very well with you. So you can think of this as kind of a reminder of what we're really dealing with. So you may know that this data is not really like data that many researchers are used to. It's not a question and answer with consumers to get an intended response. It's unprompted, it's organic, it's unstructured, which means, well, it can be a bit messy. Conversations, they don't always have that linear, clean progression. And because we're listening, instead of having an actual dialogue with participants, we can't really ask follow-up questions in a structured progression within the same set of individuals. So this universe is also shaped by communities that organically sprout, and these are formed by, life stages and interests and mindsets that will probably not perfectly align with your prospect segments. It's not data that we can easily pull by what we think of as typical variables like age or income group, because that's not how the data is structured. I wouldn't say that it represents all views, but it does represent a highly engaged viewpoint and one that is really visible to others who may be in the process of researching products and services. Now, with social media research being still relatively new, methodologies are still evolving, and there is not necessarily a formulaic or definitive right or wrong way of doing things. And this is probably why it may be difficult for research stakeholders like yourself to identify exactly what it is you want to do with this amorphous universe of discussion. What do I count? What trends should I observe? What methodologies should I consider to be able to tease out sub-themes and so forth? So these questions can be quite overwhelming. But as one who has been doing this type of research for quite a while, and having really had the opportunity to conduct studies across product verticals, what I can say is the very basic methodology that truly paves the path to noteworthy as well as actionable insights is this process of segmentation. So it's rare that I successfully uncover a piece of insight that is truly compelling just by running data after data, volume, share, sentiment, spikes, and so forth within a big bucket of discussion posts. It is when we slice and dice, applying appropriate structures, appropriate really being the operative term, structures that are aligned with well thought out business questions, that the magic begins to happen. And this process is what separates compelling and methodical social media analysis from, reports that are conducted sometimes maybe just for the sake of delivering data, but reports that maybe just sit in inboxes untouched and unread. So today, I'll use our moms data universe to explain to you how we applied an overarching analytical structure to a sampling of conversations from moms. So in this case, we wanted to analyze food and meal preparation. So we used our analysis tool to structure the data, and the tagging is 100% automated, meaning the engine does the work for us. So we took great pains to make sure our data universe is clean on the outset. So looking at the items over on the left side, first we broke it down by meal type, so breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacking. So what we have is a day in the life of meal planning and eating. Now over on the right, we essentially applied additional bucketing, including thematic segments like health and nutrition, money, cost, time factors, etc. So think of these as highly conceptual decision drivers. Also used some persona identifiers. I'm a working mom, I'm a stay-at-home mom. Also some media categorization, so breaking it down by blogs versus forums versus Facebook and Twitter and so forth, and just hundreds and hundreds of microslicers. So these are mentions for, maybe retailers like Walmart or Target and so forth, as well as pre-identified phrases like eating out, dining out, organic food, raw food, etc. And we combined and crossed all of these categories through some multi-level layering and basically generated tens of thousands of microslices of data that we then used to populate these scorecards that illustrate shifts in the ranking, the hierarchy and weighting and tendency and incidence of these data attributes, looking at different segments of what once was that amorphous discussion universe. So it's really something akin to, peeling the layers of an onion, breaking it down, slicing and dicing, and at each stage showing a different form from the previous state and revealing bits of insights and learnings at each point in the process. So in a little while, Steve will walk you through the process of categorization, but for now, to tickle your palate, I'd like to share some of the insights from our analysis. So let's start with something really, really simple. So comparing the 4 meals that we analyzed, easily we were able to quantify that dinner was more visible in discussion. So, seemingly simple, but this does have a multitude of implications. So comparing dinner to lunch, we saw like a 2-to-1 ratio. Dinner to breakfast or dinner to snacking, the ratio was nearly 4-to-1. So in that process of categorization, we started using crosstabs to see how these conversations intersected. And looking at just dinner, so these are the items that you see highlighted in red. It's really interesting to see here that it had the lowest percentage of discussion intersection with other meals, ranging only between 6 to 14%. So in comparison, the topic of dinner had a much higher penetration and discussion about other meals. So these are the items highlighted in blue, and it essentially maxed out at a nearly 30% co-mention in breakfast conversations. Well, so what? Well, this implies that overall, a much larger proportion of meals discussion in social media is truly just focused on that evening meal, and that it's likely to be a stronger dialogue initiator. It is the impetus for starting a conversation about food in mom communities. So what did we see in posts? Essentially, moms connect online to solicit meal ideas. And what you see here are examples of thread titles, and these are categorized based on some sort of attitudinal bucketing regarding what might be driving them to start a conversation about dinner. And for the most part, it's just a lot of dinner crowdsourcing. Many are just plain curious about what other people are eating. What's for dinner is the typical question in these mom forums. Some may enumerate the criteria of ingredients that they have in their freezer, or the flip side of that is, ingredients that they specifically want excluded from their dish. What on earth can they cook for dinner that doesn't contain meat, fish, nuts, or cheese? That doesn't really leave much. So some are also more process-oriented, specifically using the words, fast, easy, quick. And we'll see in the data a little bit later that moms appear to feel the biggest time crunch during dinner preparations. And finally, the bottom right, there are those that are just more aspiration driven, and they initiate the discussion more kind of like at the philosophical level, and in the process, they expose their lifestyle aspirations as well as their goals about eating healthier or really ensuring that they create variety on the dining table. So what all this really boils down to is that among meal types, dinner is really more appropriate for that social collaboration for which moms need a stream of ideas, something new and different all the time. And it's equally important that they achieve this with minimal effort. So translating that then to an actionable strategy, which is really our goal, maybe thinking of, tweeting a recipe per day for quick and easy 5-ingredient meals. So a brand like Bertolli's olive oil may tweet, baked pizza crust, shrimp, basil, olive oil, and pecorino romano. So from the process of counting to really drilling down into the conversation and conducting thematic analysis, now to the learning and the insight and the action oriented with those insights, all of this really attributable to the methodologies around data structuring. All right, next piece of insight. So still on the topic of dinner, digging a little deeper into the data, we essentially see a mindset shift between meal types. So what you're seeing here is a simple table looking at the incidence of 7 decision drivers, so nutrition, money, and so forth, against the 4 meal types. And the numbers that you see here are, a simple ranking of their incidence in discussion, 1 being the most prevalent driver within each meal type. So if you're like me, you like analytics, we can probably spend a full hour just analyzing and really taking this apart. But what I'd like to do for now is just focus on dinner as well as the top 2 boxes. And what do we see? Money observably becomes the strongest decision driver in dinner discussion. So this is a deviation from the ranking of these top 2 drivers in breakfast, lunch, or snacks. So there is this observable shift in needs as well as priorities, almost like a sudden disruption of a mindset that is more universally applicable to other meal types. So if you think about it, this is fairly intuitive. Dinner tends to be more elaborate and more planned, more orchestrated than any other meal, but our research essentially confirms that in a quantifiable manner. Right, so looking at the conversations, the popular belief that there is an inverse relationship between cost and nutritional value. So what does this mean? Saying that healthier foods are more expensive and vice versa. Cheaper foods are, not as healthy, really puts these metrics into context. And this issue, which is a challenge to moms, spurs discussion about both drivers. So what do we see? In the end, money generates stronger emphasis, which translates to economic drivers being more persuasive overall. So on closer examination, the conversation essentially reveals that moms do try their best to keep nutrition in check when making decisions about dinner. But these statements are often attached to, how do I say this, maybe ideal scenario qualifiers, or at times they appear to almost be an afterthought. So mom's saying, well, I need some cheap, somewhat healthy dinner. I am also on a really tight budget, but I care about his nutrients too. So nutritional value is secondary. Well, so what? Well, if I were, say, a web developer building out a recipe portal and I'm thinking about the structure, I would really be more inclined to prioritize value primarily and then nutrition. So in terms of the IA, or the information architecture of the site, I will make sure to categorize meals first by cost. So meals under $20, meals under $10, and so forth. Then, as a secondary layer for filtering, caloric count as subsegments. So you can really see with the analysis that we conduct using categorization, we can develop these types of business formulas and make decisions on information based on the behaviors revealed in the dialogue. All right, so last piece of insight before I turn it over to Steve, I'd like to show you how our data can provide evidence related to the value behind targeted communication based on looking at the weighting as well as distribution of the drivers against specific persona qualifiers. So lots of numbers here, but I'll walk you through it. we, go back to the 7 decision drivers as well as the 4 meals, and we're comparing 2 sets of data. So posts with qualifiers or self-identifiers for stay-at-home moms over on the left and working moms over on the right. So now, instead of ranking, which you saw on the previous slides, I'm showing you a more nuanced look at the distribution of ranking. So this is essentially normalized data. We're indexing the incidence of drivers to an average of 100. So taking the percentage and averaging that out down and indexing that to the average of 100 to be able to see how much more important one driver is to another for each meal type. So let's look at number 1, the row highlighted as 1. So this shows how there's so much more emphasis on the topic of time across the board for stay-at-home moms compared to working moms. And same is true for money, number 2. But we also see, this is really interesting, how nutrition suddenly goes out the door for stay-at-home moms, especially for dinner. So look at number 3, nutrition being extremely under-indexed in dinner conversations. So they are so much more money and time driven, whereas the variance in the weighting of these drivers are not as pronounced for working moms. So they are more somewhat equally weighted. So what does this mean? This implies that stay-at-home moms have stronger sensitivity with regards to both money and time, and as such, nutritional considerations are overshadowed. And this is really not to say that they simply don't care for health factors, but that the dialogue is focused on top-of-mind challenges related to their personal thresholds and aspirations at the dinner table. And social media revealed just this highly emotive conversation. First, about the challenge of making ends meet, and also how being a full-time mom is just so much more than a full-time job. Number 1, this illustrates the sacrifices that they make. So no eating out, no ordering in, kid stuff came first. Number 2 shows how they're always trying to make it work, looking for ways to save, constantly analyzing everything to make it work so they can continue being stay-at-home. And over on the right side, we see moms venting to fellow moms about their quality of life. How did they end up here? He assumes I have time and energy for everything. I never get any me time, but your husband gets to whenever he wants. So it's highly probable that in many stay-at-home moms that juggle many things perceive themselves to be busier than moms that are able to, retreat from the mundane of domestic life and go to work. Many little things are essentially more overwhelming, and to an extent, social media has become a place to vent and express this resentment that they don't get any me time. And this really points to an opportunity to become an advocate and a champion of stay-at-home moms. They are decision makers, and when it comes to taking care of the household, they want to feel they have an ally, that you perhaps as a brand are on their side. So that concludes our quick case presentation again today, and I showed how we started from that amorphous data structure to the process of segmenting that data, to quantitatively analyzing attributes in that data, to drilling into the context and nature of the dialogue, to formulating actionable insights. And I'll wrap it up shortly, but I'd like to pass the ball now to Steve Reeves to show you how this data structuring is as easy as a few clicks in the Visible tool. Steve?
This is just a perfect segue into, Kathy has laid great groundwork for, how we go about this, and specifically how we use the tool to perform these types of analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the tool and show you quickly how you can actually start performing this advanced segmentation on your data. So let me just go ahead and share that. And right now, we are actually inside the platform. We're in the Analyze tab. And this is just a great way where you can pick your specific searches or categories, and you can begin to overlay them against each other to get to those very deep segmentations that you might be pinpointing. So as a quick demonstration, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and select categories. And what this is going to allow us to do is to choose as many as 16 categories, but let's go ahead and just choose 3 for now: health, and then let's go ahead and choose price, and also time. So those 3 are going to drive how we're able to look at them in conjunction with different audience groups. So from here, I've created these categories, and I've created a search specifically on moms and stay-at-home moms. So let's go ahead and launch the stay-at-home moms search for dinner, and it's as simple as hitting analyze. And this is going to take, basically, it's going to take the data that is represented from the actual stay-at-home moms audience, and it's going to overlay these very specific segments on health, on price, on time. And then we're able to see here the breakout and discussion. You can drill in, you can export this for offline analysis. So here we see that for stay-at-home moms, time is of the utmost importance, and that's not surprising by any means. And then price, so time and then price come in second, and then health. But there are a lot of different ways that you can slice and cut this data. So this is actually a viewpoint of the stay-at-home mom, but we can actually then pivot on the working mom. So what we can do here is we can just hit select. We'll go back to our searches, and then we'll click the working mom for dinner. And then we begin to see how working moms discuss health, price, and time in relation to preparing dinner for their family. And we'll just wait for that to populate. And just as we're able to do before, you can cut this data a little bit more deeply. You can start to drill in and do additional analysis. Those top-line metrics you can absolutely export out. So this gives you a great a framework to be able to launch into deeper analysis. One of the other things that I did want to point out here was that we looked at this based on categories, which is great. We're looking at time, price, and health. And health is really equivalent to nutrition. What we can also do is we can switch over to our search view, and we'll show you how that could benefit. So let's go down to a search specifically on breakfast, a search on lunch, and a search on dinner. And then what we'll do here is we'll just hit analyze, and this is going to take basically all those three data sets that are represented within mom blogs and mom communities, and it's going to show you what the overall leading indicator is with regard to your meal-based discussions. So we see here that dinner obviously leads, but from there you can actually do additional analysis where you overlay potentially a category. So maybe mom's talking about gluten-free, or mom's talking about specific health attributes of these particular meals. So that's just a quick indication of the number of different ways you're able to slice and cut the data. And the great thing is that Kathy had talked about the several hundred different micro slicers, and those can all be created and overlaid against a specific content universe to get you that deeper insight and deeper analysis. So again, that's just a quick example of how you do that. I'm going to go ahead and transition back to Kathy at this point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. So, to round it out, let me say that, again, there's still really no hard and fast rules, what's definitively right or what's definitively wrong in listening. But every step in the process that you see here on the slide, it will have repercussions to the types of insights that you can gather, fueling its integrity and really the value that you can get out of the findings, how business questions are articulated, the parameters surrounding the data universe, how data is segmented, the quantitative structures, and how you conduct discovery of themes. And here are, to leave you with several questions to start from that really map back to these factors that fuel the insight. So in terms of, articulating business questions, start by asking, what is the state of the state? What are the challenges to the category that is prompting us to conduct listening initiatives right now? What do we want to know about our consumers, how they think, how they feel, how they behave, and the challenges that they're currently experiencing? And point number 3, what layering should we employ so that when we do this listening, we do it in phases, essentially making it more manageable and also really ensuring that we let the nature of the dialogue drive the direction of the research. Now, the parameters surrounding the data universe is the most important postulate that research stakeholders should really understand. So it's important to really think through, what data universe will be most meaningful to us. Remember, it doesn't always have to be centered on the brand. Maybe it has to be mindset level. And remember, you don't also need to gather everything, every single post out there. You just need a really good set of data to work with. What discussion buckets are important to compare against each other? And related to that, what equivalence decisions do we need to keep in mind? So when we're structuring the searches or the queries, as we call it, the keywords around these assets, we build them out in a similar way, in a similar fashion, so they're equivalent. And when we're putting them side by side, we're comparing apples to apples. It's tough to work with unstructured data. So, based on a combination of your research objectives, learning from other research studies and so forth, really thinking about how you should really be initially slicing and dicing this universe. How do we architect the analytical structure? What is the appropriate type of segmentation? Numbers are important to all of us, but we always need to remember that social media is directional data, and keeping in mind that it may not be wise to look at absolute counts, and that data is more valuable in the context of comparisons. Let's determine, are there, non-negotiable metrics that this research needs to deliver, and it's critical to set expectations around these upfront. And related to this, are we open to qualitative analysis? To discover themes that are not necessarily supported by numbers or data points? What is our threshold of acceptance, if you will, for these types of information? And lastly, are we prepared to venture into a second phase for us to be able to further quantify things and for us to be able to drill down further into essential themes? So, these 10 questions should hopefully kick you off in your next listening project. I hope you found the examples that we shared thought-provoking as well as inspiring. So if you're not feeling like you're getting much value from your listening efforts, perhaps it's time to think of more creative approaches, outside the box of baseline monitoring approaches like share of voice, spike analysis, or even sentiment to a degree, but considering things like attribute hierarchies or analysis of keyword association. So there's plenty of opportunities to play and explore hypotheses. And if you're willing and open to experiment, well, we're more than willing and happy to partner up and explore and discover new ways and new methods to do this with you. So at this point, I'll pass it back to Rich Miller to kick off the Q&A. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you, Steve, for your time there. We appreciate that. We had a couple of questions come in that we haven't been able to answer since they were actually submitted, and we actually had a couple of follow-up questions, too, to some of the answers that we were able to provide. Somebody had asked a question about engagement functionality, understanding that that's part of a lot of the more advanced platforms. So the question becomes, as you're doing your analysis and you're drilling deeper and you're drilling deeper and you're drilling deeper, and you find a post that may be a source of insight, but you need some clarity around it, do you find yourself engaging with people around specific posts to get answers to questions? And kind of just how does engagement play into the process of getting that advanced segmentation?
Yeah, I think that at the moment we actually don't do that, and only because it's based upon client's threshold, if you will, in doing that kind of engagement. So once you start doing that, you know that you won't be able to stop. So you can't just do that on like a one-off basis and decide that you'd want to engage upfront with a specific poster about something. It's something that you need to plan out more on a longer-term basis, because once you engage, it's just not something that you can say that I'm not going to do this anymore tomorrow. So in the type of research that we do, in terms of segmentation and so forth, we don't engage. We don't get clarification on some of the posts, and to an extent, we don't also see that happen within forum communities and so forth. Most of these forum communities are sacred, if you will. Part of its integrity is the fact that there's not a lot of brands overseeing these conversations, and that's why a lot of these consumers feel very open about being able to say how they really feel about things.
Great, thank you. Steve, we had another question come in about the categories. You made a great point that there are some categories that come out of the box with the visible tool, so we can call those kind of canned categories. But then you also have the ability to create your own custom categories as you become more familiar with the data and more familiar with the ins and outs of the tool. But the question was, can you give me a little bit more of a review of the types of canned categories that you get in the visible platform? Those are important analytic pivots, and I think people just want a little bit more detail on the types of categories, examples of the other categories that they get out of the box.
Sure, absolutely. So some of the out of the box categories might be things like people's likes or dislikes for a specific, for anything. So, trying to mimic how somebody might speak online about having an affinity or potentially, a negative reaction to anything and then we can overlay that against any content universe. The other things we can do, things like mimicking purchase cycles. So people that are thinking about buying versus people that have bought something, and then following that same thought process, what are they talking about in terms of post-purchase? How satisfied are they? So those are a couple. Moms in general, that's actually one that we can, that would be out of the box. And there are a lot of different ways to build your category segmentations. They come unlimited with the platform, so we have a number of pre-built ones that you can use. You can just plug and play. And then you have the flexibility to build as many as you want. And those can be on things like, for instance, stay-at-home moms, the one that I did there, versus working moms. That was a custom one, obviously. But those are very simple to use, very easy to recreate, and they help you to get into very specific and nuanced parts of your data set. So,
great, thank you. Steve, got one more question for you while I've got you on the line. Somebody had asked the question, or it might be for Kathy, actually. We'll have to see how this works out. All of the analysis that you carried out, Kathy, for your report, was that all done within the visible platform, the collection of data, the slicing and dicing of data, or were there other tools involved now canning things like, Excel or Word or PowerPoint?
No, I mean, it's all available within the platform as Steve had shown you. You should be able to layer slicers on top of each other within the tool, and also even be able to analyze multiple attributes at the same time. So from there, obviously, we then took that information and, created some data visualizations, and of course, that's in Excel. But all of the raw data, the tool can essentially spit out. Steve, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything else. Okay.
No, I think that's perfectly in line with with my understanding as well, and absolutely, yep, right on point.
Okay. Kathy, there's another question here that's kind of an interesting one. As you're diving into all of the data, you're getting very good aggregated information about the attitudes of a segment, the behavior of a segment. But the question that somebody posed was, how would you start to identify key influencers possibly within that attitudinal and behavior segmentation?
Okay, that's a very good question. So, influencers can come in many forms. Again, the criteria for influencers can vary from client to client. So this will definitely involve the client in being able to identify those criteria and, benchmarks and thresholds, if you will. Is it based on, the number of posts, the number of frequency, their activity level within the tool, also taking a look at maybe their followers and so forth. So there's a lot of data points that go into being able to identify maybe a top 10, top 50, top 100 list, and just, again, creating that matrix of information and prioritizing. And but I would also say that in addition to that quantitative analysis, doing some qualitative analysis as well, and just really reading into the types of information that these people or these authors say in social media and how other people react to them as well.
Great, thank you. And there was another question I think I can bundle up with a couple of other questions that came in. And maybe the way to phrase this question is to think about, you know, the analysis that you built, and how do you break up your time, and how much time is allocated to the different pieces of the process that you highlighted at the very end of your presentation. So we had one person come in with a question that said, how long does it take to prepare that analysis that you did for moms and meals? But maybe even refining that a little bit more is, you know, to say, because projects can be all over the place. How much time in general do you spend defining the business problem? How much time do you spend setting up the queries and getting your quantitative and your qualitative analysis? How does time get distributed roughly across your circular diagram for the average project? Because a project may take, you know, 5 hours for a simple question, or it may take a couple of weeks for a very complex question. But how does time get allocated?
No, absolutely. That's a good question. I'd say that, you know, articulating the business question is probably the most important portion of, or the most important step, if you will, because that will really almost become the blueprint for the analysis that we need to conduct. So as for how long that would take, well, that probably would involve several meetings and several brainstorm sessions with, you know, the researcher as well as all the report stakeholders and so forth. Defining the data universe, it could be, you know, it probably doesn't take more than a day to be able to define that. This also involves a lot of the query building or building out the search that will then gather or collect the relevant data universe that we care about. And then looking at this circular structure, the structure portion, the applying an analytical structure, is probably the most time-consuming of all, because here we begin to, you know, think about our goals. We begin to think about also some of the things that we find in previous research, and, you know, what do we really want to get out of this research? And this also involves a lot of trial and error. We try some structures, see if that yields something interesting. If it doesn't, you know, we back out and we try something else. So as I mentioned at the end of my presentation a while ago, that it really involves a lot of experimentation and a lot of just being open and thinking outside of the box to see what structures may really play out well, depending on the nature of the dialogue within your particular category, if you will. So I would say within this structure, this is probably 50% of the effort, because once you have a good structure in place, the quantitative will almost be effortless. It will just reveal itself to you, and from the quantitative findings, that would then be used to kind of like guide the qualitative analysis as well as the drill down that you need to do to be able to like really bring to life the thematics around what it is you're trying to really figure out. Hope that helps.
That does very much. Thank you for that answer to that question. I think that was really helpful in helping people understand how to allocate time across these things. Well, you know, those are the ends of the questions that we've had come in. We do want to cut to the wrap-up first by saying thank you very much for attending our webinar today. I also want to say thank you to Kathy and Steve for their time and effort in this. It was very, very well done. I appreciate it very much, as do all of the people on the session, I'm sure. A quick little bit here about Visible. Really what we do is we differentiate ourselves by a couple of things against our competition. We talk about, you know, the data that you can trust. And data is a big issue for us. It's getting external data. We're also going to be talking more in the future about internal data, getting things that maybe aren't part of the social media realm but are very specific to your organization, integrating that information into the data set that you can use to analyze some of these business questions. And we're going to be talking more about that when we get into January, February, and March. You know, examples of where somebody takes maybe primary market research and survey data that they executed online, and they bounce that up against the stuff that they're finding on social media to really get additional insight. And then finally, the other big thing that we use to differentiate ourselves is really that industry expertise. People like Steve and people like Kathy that really know social media data, that can really help you peel the onion to get the insights that you're looking for. We work with agencies, we work with companies to derive those insights every day, and that really kind of sets up our differentiation. Kind of the next steps here, if you do want to learn more about Visible, you're curious maybe what some of these things might look like for your company or a business problem that you're looking at, and you might want to see that in a customized demo, we'd love to hear from you. You can send a message to info@visibletechnologies.com. You can send us a message on Twitter @visible, or you can go onto our webpage and you can actually ask for a demo request on our website. I mentioned some of our upcoming events. We have one coming up in mid-December that will be on our website, and we'll also be letting people know through email if you are registered on our website. The next one is going to be with Kantar. Kantar is part of the WPP family of agencies, and what Kantar does really better than anybody else out there is they really focus on the visualization of data, the analysis of data. So this is creating things like infographics and other just really, really stellar visualizations of data that companies use in their analytics, but also use in some of their advertising and their own marketing. They work with firms like Motorola, Google, all the big brands throughout the world. And they're going to be coming on and they're going to be talking about how they work their way through that process of analyzing data specifically for the visualization of data within a business problem that they're trying to solve. And we're going to have somebody from Kantar on to talk about that process. And then finally, if you do have any other questions, you want to see some of our intelligence reports, you want to see some of our webcasts, Steve did a very, very brief demo of a very detailed piece of functionality within our platform. If you want to see, in general, some cases of the ease of use, how you solve problems around competitive analysis or campaign analysis or even high-level brand analysis, we have some 2 to 3 minute videos out on our website that you'd be able to find underneath Learn More About Visible that'll help you understand the ease of use of the Visible platform to help you get insight through social media. So that is all. Keep an eye open for our next session, which will be coming in December with Kantar. If you have any questions at all, info@visibletechnologies.com. Thank you very much for your time. Take care.